What happens when a powerful CEO abandons the woman he once shared everything with, leaving her to fend for herself? 25 years later, his past comes back to haunt him in the most unexpected place. Inside a courtroom, where the daughter he never acknowledged stands before him, ready to reveal the truth he's tried so hard to bury. This is the story of betrayal, resilience, and the ultimate reckoning for a man who thought he could escape his past. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future stories. Nina Johnson sat in a plush leather chair, her fingers tightly clasped in her lap, the coolness of the room settling into her skin. Across the desk from her sat Thomas Whitman, the CEO of Whitman & Company, a man she had known far too well for far too long. The weight of what she was about to say hung between them, invisible but suffocating. Thomas didn't glance up from the stack of documents he was reviewing. The only sound in the room was the quiet scratching of his pen on paper and the occasional soft shuffle of his movements. Nina's heart thudded in her chest, each second feeling like an eternity. She had played this moment over and over in her head, but now that it was here, her nerves were unbearable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thomas set his pen down and leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and calculating as they met hers. This was the Thomas she had known in private, not the charismatic man who commanded a room full of board members or shareholders. "Nina," he said, his tone distant, "I assume this isn't about work." Her throat tightened. She had rehearsed this, but now the words felt heavy, stuck in her mouth. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "No," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough that she noticed, but hoped he wouldn't. "It's not about work." Thomas said nothing, simply watching her. Waiting for her to continue. His silence was unnerving, the calm before a storm she wasn't sure she could weather. Her heart pounded louder in her chest, but she pushed forward. "I'm pregnant," she blurted out, her voice barely more than a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. For several long moments, Thomas didn't move. He didn't speak. It was as though she hadn't said anything at all. Nina felt the weight of the room close in around her, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Finally, Thomas let out a sigh, his expression unchanged. "I see." That was all. No surprise, no concern, just a simple acknowledgement, as though she had told him something as insignificant as a missed meeting or a typo in a report. Nina felt her stomach knot with disbelief. Was that it? "It's yours, Thomas," she added, her voice firmer now. "I thought you should know." He sighed again, this time standing up and walking slowly around the desk until he was standing in front of her. His posture was calm, measured, his face devoid of any real emotion. "Nina," he began, his voice low and deliberate. "This is unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Nina's voice cracked. This wasn't the reaction she had expected. She had imagined many things: shock, anger, maybe even some sense of responsibility, but not this cold indifference. "Yes," Thomas continued, "you should have been more careful." Her heart sank. "We were careful," she replied, her words now tinged with frustration. How could he act so casual, so detached, after everything? "Clearly not careful enough," he responded, his tone growing sharper. His eyes finally met hers, narrowing slightly. "What do you expect me to do about this?" Nina stared at him in disbelief. "I thought you'd want to know," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought we could figure something out together." "Figure something out?" Thomas's voice had a cold edge now. "Nina, you know the situation. I'm married. I have a reputation to protect, a family. What happened between us was ever meant to be anything more than what it was." His words cut through her like a knife. Nina had believed, maybe foolishly, that what they had was more than just an affair. She had imagined a future where he might claim her, where they might be something more than a secret. But now, sitting here, she realized just how wrong she had been. "I'm keeping the baby," she said, her voice steady now, fueled by a mixture of anger and determination. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair, as though the situation were a minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering moment. He looked at her, his expression softening only slightly, but his words remained cold. "I can't be involved in this, Nina. You know that." Nina felt her hands begin to tremble in her lap. "You're just going to walk away?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I have to," he replied, his tone as detached as ever. "And you should too." She stood, her anger boiling beneath the surface. "I can't just walk away from this, Thomas. It's your child too." Thomas's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. "Nina, let this go. I'm warning you. I've taken care of you up until now, but if you make this a problem for me, I'll make sure you regret it." Her heart dropped. What are you saying? His voice was low, dangerous. I'm saying this is your last day at Whitman & Co. and I've already spoken to HR. You'll get a severance package, of course. But after today, you're no longer employed here. The words hit her like a slap to the face. You're firing me because I'm pregnant? Because of you? I'm protecting my family, he said, his tone now icy. And you should do the same. Nina stood there, her whole body shaking with fury and disbelief. How could this man, the one she had trusted, the one she had thought cared about her, be so callous, so heartless? Without another word, she turned and walked out of the office, the tears she had been holding back threatening to spill over, but she wouldn't cry in front of him. Not now, not ever. Nina's footsteps echoed down the long hallway as she left Thomas Whitman's office for the last time. The pristine walls of Whitman & Co. seemed to close in on her as she walked, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her chest. She felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs, but she forced herself to keep moving. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she refused to break down. Not here, not in front of the people she had worked with for years. As she approached her desk, her colleagues greeted her with smiles and casual nods, unaware of the turmoil she was experiencing. To them, it was just another ordinary day. Nina, however, knew it was anything but. She gathered her things quietly, avoiding eye contact with the few co-workers nearby. Her hands trembled as she placed personal items into a small cardboard box, the framed picture of her mother, the little cactus she had nurtured on her desk, the notebook where she had scribbled down ideas during countless meetings. Each object felt like a reminder of the life she was leaving behind, the career that had been taken from her in an instant. Nina, everything okay? A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Sarah, a friendly colleague who often shared lunch with Nina. Sarah's brow furrowed as she noticed Nina packing up her things. Yeah, Nina replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Just moving on. Sarah tilted her head, confused. Wait, what do you mean? You're leaving? Nina swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. It's a long story. I'll explain later. Sarah's eyes widened, but she didn't push further. I'm really going to miss you around here. You're one of the best, she said, her voice laced with sincerity. I hope you know that. Nina nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She wanted to tell Sarah everything, to share the truth of what had just happened, to explain the betrayal she had just experienced. But she couldn't. Not now. It was too raw, too painful. Instead, she finished packing and gave Sarah a small wave as she walked toward the elevator, her heart heavy with uncertainty about what the future held. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Nina leaned back against the wall, her mind racing. Her world had just been turned upside down. She had spent years building a life, a career, only to have it ripped away in a matter of minutes. Now she was left with nothing but a severance package and the weight of a secret that would change her life forever. But despite the devastation she felt, Nina knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to keep her baby. No matter what Thomas Whitman said, no matter what threats he made, she wasn't going to abandon her child. She had already made up her mind. She didn't need Thomas's help. She didn't need his money or his protection. Nina had survived on her own before, and she could do it again. But as the elevator descended, the enormity of what lay ahead started to sink in. Nina was now a single, unemployed woman about to become a mother. And the father of her child, the man who had promised her so much, had just turned his back on her without a second thought. Over the next few weeks, Nina tried to adjust to her new reality. The first days were the hardest. Every morning she woke up expecting to go to work, only to remember that her life had changed. The walls of her small apartment seemed to close in on her, the silence reminding her of what she had lost. She sent out resumes, hoping to find another job, but each interview ended the same way, with a polite rejection or worse, no response at all. It didn't take long for her to realize that Thomas had made good on his threat. He had blacklisted her, ensuring that no one in the industry would hire her again. She was trapped. The savings she had managed to build up over the years began to dwindle, and soon Nina found herself cutting back on expenses, trying to make every penny last. She canceled her gym membership, stopped going out for coffee, and started cooking every meal at home. Still, the bills piled up. Rent, utilities, groceries. And with a baby on the way, the financial pressure only mounted. Her friends checked in on her, offering support, but Nina kept most of them at arm's length. She didn't want to be pitied. She didn't want anyone to see how much she was struggling. She had always been independent, and now, more than ever, she was determined to figure things out on her own. But despite her best efforts, the reality of her situation weighed heavily on her. She was about to bring a child into the world, and she had no idea how she was going to provide for them. The fear gnawed at her every day, growing louder as her pregnancy progressed. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of job rejections, Nina sat at her kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills. Her hands shook as she opened the envelopes, the numbers blurring before her eyes. It felt like everything was spiraling out of control. Suddenly, a sharp kick from inside her belly pulled her out of her despair. Nina gasped, placing her hand on her stomach, feeling the movement of her baby for the first time. A wave of emotion washed over her, and tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep sense of connection to the life growing inside her. In that moment, something shifted inside Nina. She realized that no matter how difficult things became, she wasn't alone. She had her baby, and that was enough. They would get through this together. She wiped her tears, her resolve hardening. She had faced challenges before, and she would face them again. The road ahead was uncertain, but Nina knew one thing for sure. She would fight for her child, no matter the cost. As Nina's pregnancy progressed, so did her determination. She had always been resilient, but now, with the weight of impending motherhood on her shoulders, she found a strength she never knew she had. Every day was a battle, but every night, when she felt the baby moving inside her, she was reminded of why she was fighting so hard. The fear and uncertainty that had once consumed her were now tempered by a fierce love and protectiveness for the life she was bringing into the world. But with each passing week, the reality of her financial situation became harder to ignore. Despite sending out countless resumes, Nina still hadn't secured a job. The interviews, when she could get them, were few and far between, and every time she walked into one, she couldn't help but wonder if the rejection that followed was somehow tied to Thomas Whitman's influence. One afternoon, after receiving yet another rejection email, Nina decided to visit a local women's resource center. She had resisted going for weeks, pride holding her back, but now she knew she couldn't afford to be proud. She needed help. She needed a plan. The resource center was small but welcoming. The moment Nina walked in, a kind woman at the front desk greeted her, offering her a warm smile that immediately put her at ease. "Hi, I'm Nina Johnson," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm here to get some help. I'm expecting." The woman, whose name tag read Ellen, nodded understandingly. "Of course, Nina. We're here to help. Why don't you come on in, and we'll get you set up with someone who can assist you." Nina followed Ellen into a small office where another woman, slightly older and wearing glasses, sat behind a desk. Her name was Margaret, and as soon as Nina sat down, she could feel the warmth and understanding in Margaret's gaze. "So Nina," Margaret began, her voice gentle but firm, "how far along are you?" 6 months, Nina replied, resting her hand on her growing belly. "It's just me. I lost my job a few months ago, and I haven't been able to find another one since." Margaret nodded, her expression empathetic. "That's tough, but you're doing the right thing by coming here. We can help you get back on your feet, both before and after the baby is born." Nina felt a weight lift from her shoulders as Margaret explained the various programs and resources the center could offer. They could help with prenatal care, connect her to job training programs, and even provide temporary financial assistance. For the first time in months, Nina felt a glimmer of hope. "I've been trying so hard," Nina admitted, her voice wavering, "but it just feels like the walls are closing in. Every door I knock on, it's closed before I can even explain myself." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes filled with compassion. "You've been through a lot, Nina, but the fact that you're here now, looking for solutions, tells me that you are stronger than you think. We'll help you find a way." Over the next few weeks, Nina began to piece her life back together, one step at a time. She attended job skills workshops, met with financial counselors, and started receiving medical care through the center's network. It wasn't easy, nothing ever was, but the sense of community and support she found there gave her the strength to keep going. Still, as Nina prepared for the birth of her child, she couldn't shake the lingering thoughts of Thomas Whitman. She had tried to push him out of her mind, to focus on the future she was building for herself and her baby, but every now and then, his name would come up in a business article or a news story. He was still thriving, still on top of the world, as if nothing had happened. It infuriated her. One evening, as Nina sat on her small couch, her legs propped up on a pillow, she caught a glimpse of a headline in the business section of the local newspaper. It read, "Whitman & Co. CEO expands company's influence across global markets." Her heart clenched as she read the article. Thomas was more successful than ever, his empire continuing to grow, untouched by the personal devastation he had left in his wake. He had moved on effortlessly, while Nina had been left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. As she stared at the article, a thought began to take root in her mind, one she had been avoiding for months. She didn't need Thomas's help to survive, but that didn't mean he should walk away from his responsibility. Her baby had a right to know who their father was, and Thomas had a responsibility to acknowledge the life he had helped create. But confronting him again, after everything he had done to her, after the threats and the betrayal, the thought made Nina's stomach churn with anxiety. But as she placed her hand on her belly, she knew that this wasn't about her anymore. It was about her child. Nina nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. What exactly can we do? Well, first and foremost, we'll need to establish paternity. Once the baby is born, we can request a DNA test to prove that Thomas is the father. From there, we can file for child support and establish his legal responsibilities. The courts take these matters seriously, especially when a child's welfare is involved. Nina swallowed hard, absorbing the weight of what Sarah was saying. It all sounded so formal, so intimidating. She had spent so many months trying to stay out of Thomas's world, but now it seemed inevitable that she would have to step back into it. And what if he tries to retaliate? Nina asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah's expression softened. That's why you have me. If he tries anything, legal or otherwise, we'll be ready. He's not above the law, no matter how much power or money he has. We'll make sure he can't harm you or your child. The words were comforting, but Nina still felt a knot of anxiety deep in her stomach. She had spent so long being afraid of Thomas, of what he could do, that it was hard to imagine a world where she could stand up to him and win. But as she sat there, feeling the reassuring presence of Sarah across from her, she knew she had made the right choice. She wasn't going to run anymore. She wasn't going to let Thomas dictate her future. I'm ready, Nina said finally, her voice steady and firm. Sarah nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. Good. We'll take it step by step, and I'll be with you every step of the way. As the weeks passed, Nina continued to prepare herself both mentally and emotionally for what was to come. Sarah had already started the paperwork to file for paternity, and while the process wouldn't officially begin until after the baby was born, the first steps were already in motion. Nina focused on staying healthy, attending her prenatal appointments, and taking care of herself as best as she could. The Resource Center continued to support her, offering everything from birthing classes to financial planning workshops. Slowly but surely, she began to feel more in control of her life again. But even as she built a support system around herself, there were still nights when she lay awake, wondering what Thomas would do when he found out she was coming for him legally. Would he fight her? Would he use his vast resources to drag her through a long, exhausting court battle? Or would he simply try to make her disappear, as he had done before? Nina pushed those thoughts aside as much as she could, focusing on the only thing that truly mattered, her baby. She reminded herself every day that this wasn't just about money or revenge. This was about ensuring her child had the life they deserved, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. The day finally arrived when Nina gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The labor had been long and exhausting, but the moment she held her daughter in her arms, everything else faded away. All the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, it was all worth it. Tears welled up in Nina's eyes as she cradled the tiny baby against her chest, her heart overflowing with love and protectiveness. This was her daughter, her miracle, and she was going to make sure that no matter what happened, this little girl would grow up knowing that she was loved, cherished, and protected. What are you going to name her? One of the nurses asked, her voice soft and kind. Nina looked down at her daughter, the baby's tiny fingers curling around her own. I'm going to name her Jade. The nurse smiled warmly. Jade, that's beautiful. Nina smiled back, a sense of peace washing over her. No matter what battles lay ahead, she had her daughter. And that was all the strength she needed. The first few weeks with baby Jade were a blur of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and an overwhelming sense of love. Nina's world now revolved around her daughter, and every moment she spent with her was filled with both joy and an ever-growing resolve to fight for their future. Despite the challenges, Nina's heart swelled with pride each time she looked into her daughter's eyes. Jade was a perfect mix of her mother's strength and determination, and even though she was still just a baby, Nina could already see the potential in her. She would grow up strong and independent, just like her mother, no matter who her father was or what he had done. But as much as Nina wanted to focus solely on her new role as a mother, the looming presence of Thomas Whitman never fully disappeared from her mind. She knew that the time was coming when she would have to face him again, but this time, she wasn't going to walk into his office quietly. This time, she had the law on her side. A few days after returning home from the hospital, Nina received a call from Sarah, her lawyer. The paternity paperwork was ready to be filed, and the next step was to officially notify Thomas. Nina's heart raced as she listened to Sarah explain the process. It was all becoming very real now, and the thought of seeing Thomas again, this time with their daughter in the picture, filled her with a mix of anxiety and determination. "We'll serve him with the paperwork next week," Sarah explained. "Once we file, he'll be legally required to take a paternity test. After that, we'll move forward with child support and any other legal obligations." Nina nodded, her grip tightening on the phone. "Do you think he'll fight it?" Sarah paused for a moment before answering. "It's hard to say. Men like Thomas Whitman don't like being backed into a corner, especially when it comes to their personal lives. But the law is on your side, Nina. He can't just walk away from this." Nina took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "I just want to make sure my daughter gets what she deserves." "And she will," Sarah reassured her. "No matter what he tries to do, we'll make sure that he's held accountable. This is about Jade now." After the call, Nina sat in her small living room, cradling Jade in her arms as she processed everything. Her daughter's peaceful face was a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She knew this fight wasn't going to be easy, but she also knew that she couldn't back down. Thomas had walked away once, but this time, she wouldn't let him. This time, he would face the consequences of his actions. A week later, the paperwork was officially filed, and the process of notifying Thomas began. Sarah had arranged for a legal server to deliver the documents directly to him at his office, a move that would ensure he couldn't ignore or avoid the situation. Nina had been warned that once Thomas was served, things might escalate quickly. Men like him didn't take kindly to being forced into anything, and she braced herself for the possibility of a confrontation. Sure enough, 2 days later, her phone rang. The caller ID flashed a number she didn't recognize, but somehow, Nina knew who it was before she even answered. "Nina," came the familiar voice on the other end of the line. It was cold, clipped, and full of the same arrogance she had come to associate with Thomas. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Nina's grip on the phone tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm doing what's right for our daughter," but Thomas. There was a brief silence on the other end, and Nina could almost picture him, pacing back and forth in his office, his face twisted with frustration. "I thought I made myself clear months ago," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I don't want anything to do with this. You're making a huge mistake." "No, Thomas," Nina replied, her voice steady and firm. "The mistake was thinking you could just walk away from this. Jade is your daughter, and you have a responsibility to her. I'm not asking for anything for myself, but I will not let you abandon her like you did me." Thomas let out a harsh laugh, the sound dripping with condescension. "You think this is going to work? You think dragging me into court is going to change anything?" Nina's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let him intimidate her. "This isn't about me anymore, Thomas. It's about Jade. She deserves to know who her father is, and you don't get to erase her just because it's inconvenient for you." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. When Thomas spoke again, his voice was lower, more dangerous. "You've made this a lot more complicated than it needed to be, Nina. You should have just taken the severance and moved on. Now you're forcing my hand." Nina's stomach tightened, but she held her ground. "I'm not afraid of you, Thomas. You don't get to control my life anymore." There was another pause, and then, without warning, the line went dead. Nina stared at the phone in her hand, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. She had known this would be hard, but hearing Thomas's voice again, hearing the barely veiled threats in his tone, it had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. But at the same time, it had solidified her resolve. She wasn't backing down. She placed the phone on the table beside her and looked down at Jade, who was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. Nina's heart swelled with love and protectiveness as she watched her daughter's tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. For the first time in a long time, Nina felt a sense of peace settle over her. Thomas could fight all he wanted, but this wasn't about him anymore. This was about Jade, and Nina would do whatever it took to make sure her daughter had the life she deserved. The days following Thomas's call were tense. Nina had expected him to retaliate, but for a while there was nothing but silence. Sarah assured her that this was normal, that Thomas and his legal team were likely preparing their own defense, but it didn't make the waiting any easier. Nina continued to focus on Jade, who was growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. The sleepless nights and constant feedings were exhausting, but they were also a reminder of why Nina was fighting so hard. Jade was worth every sacrifice. One afternoon, as Nina was feeding Jade, her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Thomas's legal team just reached out. They're pushing for a settlement meeting. We'll talk details soon." Nina stared at the message, her heart racing. A settlement meeting? What did that mean? Was Thomas finally willing to take responsibility, or was this just another tactic to avoid a court battle? As questions swirled in her mind, Nina felt a surge of uncertainty. This was it. This was the moment when everything would either come together or fall apart. She would soon be sitting across from the man who had turned her life upside down, fighting not just for herself, but for her daughter. The weeks leading up to the settlement meeting were filled with tension. Nina tried to stay focused on Jade, who was growing more beautiful and lively with each passing day. But the thought of facing Thomas again, this time with lawyers involved, weighed heavily on her mind. At the day, she had no idea what to expect, but she knew she had to be prepared for anything. Sarah had reassured her countless times. "We'll go in strong, Nina," she said during one of their many meetings. "We're not going to let him bully you, and we certainly aren't going to let him walk away without taking responsibility." Still, Nina couldn't help but feel a knot of anxiety in her chest. This was a man with limitless resources, power, and influence. He had already made it clear that he didn't want to be involved in their daughter's life, and Nina feared what lengths he might go to in order to avoid that responsibility. On the day of the meeting, Nina dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made her feel confident but also comfortable. She knew that appearances mattered in situations like this. She wanted to look strong in control and prepared, even if inside she felt like a bundle of nerves. Sarah arrived at Nina's apartment early to go over the final details. As always, her presence was a calming force. "Don't worry," Sarah said as they sat down in Nina's small living room. "We've got everything covered. No matter what they try, we'll be ready. Just remember, this is about Jade, and you're doing the right thing for her." Nina nodded, but her stomach churned. She held Jade in her arms, the baby's soft breathing helping to ground her in the moment. "I know," Nina replied, her voice steady, "but it's still hard." "It will be," Sarah admitted, "but you're stronger than you think, and you've got me by your side." They arrived at the law firm's office downtown, a sleek building with tall glass windows and marble floors. The air inside was cool, and the soft hum of conversations echoed through the lobby. Sarah led Nina to a conference room on the 10th floor, where Thomas and his legal team were already seated. The moment Nina stepped into the room, her heart skipped a beat. Thomas looked as sharp and put together as ever, his expensive suit tailored to perfection, his expression as unreadable as the day he had dismissed her. But when their eyes met, something flickered behind his cool exterior, something that looked like frustration or maybe even regret. Nina refused to let it faze her. She sat down across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. This wasn't about the past anymore. This was about the future. She had to focus on Jade, on what was right for her daughter. Thomas's lawyer, a man in his late 50s with graying hair and a stern demeanor, cleared his throat and began to speak. "Mr. Whitman is willing to settle this matter privately, outside of court," he said, his voice measured and professional. "We're prepared to offer a generous financial settlement in exchange for a confidentiality agreement." Nina blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the offer. She glanced at Sarah, who was already scribbling notes on her legal pad. "I see," Sarah said, her tone neutral. "And what exactly does this generous settlement entail?" Thomas's lawyer slid a folder across the table, which Sarah opened and began reviewing. Nina could see the tension in Sarah's face as she scanned the pages, but Sarah remained calm. After a moment, Sarah looked up. "This settlement is substantial," she acknowledged, "but there's something missing here. What about paternity? What about his legal responsibilities as Jade's father?" The lawyer shifted in his seat, clearly prepared for this question. "Mr. Whitman is willing to provide financial support, but he does not wish to establish a legal relationship with the child. He prefers to handle this matter privately." Nina's heart sank. Of course, Thomas was trying to buy his way out of the situation, just as she had feared. He didn't want to be involved in Jade's life. He just wanted to pay them off and move on, as if his daughter didn't even exist. Sarah's voice cut through the tension. "Nina, what are your thoughts on this?" Nina swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly. She had anticipated this. Thomas had never wanted to be involved in their child's life. But hearing it stated so plainly, as if Jade was just another problem he could throw money at, made her blood boil. "I don't care about the money," Nina said, her voice stronger than she had expected. "I'm not here for a payout. I'm here for my daughter's future. She deserves to know who her father is. She deserves to have that legal acknowledgement." Thomas's expression didn't change, but Nina could feel the tension in the room shift. His lawyer, however, seemed unfazed. "I understand your concerns," the lawyer said calmly, "but Mr. Whitman has made it clear that he does not wish to be involved beyond providing financial support." Before Nina could respond, Sarah stepped in. "Mr. Whitman may not wish to be involved, but the law doesn't work that way. Nina is entitled to pursue legal recognition of paternity, and we're fully prepared to do that. This isn't about convenience for Mr. Whitman. It's about the rights of the child. For the first time, Thomas spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but Nina could hear the frustration behind it. This doesn't have to be a battle, Nina. I'm offering you more than enough to take care of Jade. Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. Nina met his gaze, refusing to back down. It's already complicated, Thomas. You can't just throw money at this and make it go away. Jade is your daughter, and whether you like it or not, she deserves to have you acknowledge that. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, his lawyer leaned forward, clearly trying to diffuse the situation. We understand that this is a difficult situation for all parties involved. Perhaps we can take a short break to reassess. Nina nodded, grateful for the moment to breathe. She stood up and followed Sarah out of the conference room, her heart pounding. As soon as they were alone, Nina turned to Sarah, her voice filled with frustration. "They're trying to buy us off," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They don't care about Jade. They just want this to go away." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "I know, but we're not going to let that happen. You're standing your ground, Nina, and you're doing the right thing. They'll push back, but you've got the law on your side." Nina took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I just want what's best for Jade. That's all. And that's exactly what we're fighting for," Sarah reassured her. "We'll go back in there and we'll make sure they know we're not backing down. This isn't about money, it's about Jade's future." Nina nodded, feeling a surge of determination. No matter how hard this got, no matter how much Thomas and his legal team tried to sidestep their responsibility, she wasn't going to let them win. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her daughter. After the brief break, Nina and Sarah walked back into the conference room, their determination renewed. Thomas and his legal team were already seated, their expressions unreadable. Nina took her seat, her mind focused on Jade and what this meeting truly meant for her daughter's future. She refused to be intimidated, and she certainly wasn't going to let Thomas buy his way out of responsibility. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the rustling of papers as Thomas's lawyer adjusted his notes. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. "We've taken the time to reassess, and our stance remains the same," she began. "Nina is not here for a financial payout. While we appreciate Mr. Whitman's offer, this is about more than money. It's about legal recognition and responsibility. We're prepared to move forward with a paternity test and, if necessary, file for child support through the courts." Nina could feel the tension in the room shift as Sarah's words settled. Thomas's lawyer remained calm, but it was clear they had hoped to avoid this path. Thomas, however, looked directly at Nina, his jaw clenched tightly. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something, but he stayed silent. His lawyer responded smoothly. "Mr. Whitman has made his position clear. He is willing to provide substantial financial support without the need for legal entanglements. However, if you insist on pursuing legal avenues, you should be aware that this could become a lengthy and costly process for all parties involved." Nina could feel her anger rising. This was exactly what she had feared. Thomas's team was trying to scare her, to make her believe that pursuing what was right for Jade would be too difficult and costly. But she wasn't going to back down. She had come too far. Sarah leaned forward, her expression sharp. "We are fully aware of the legal process, and we are more than prepared to pursue it. If Mr. Whitman wishes to avoid the courts, he can agree to a paternity test and establish child support without the need for further action. Otherwise, we will proceed as planned." For a brief moment, the room was silent again, the tension almost unbearable. Nina's heart raced as she waited for Thomas to respond. She couldn't read his expression, but she could feel the weight of his presence bearing down on her. Would he fight this all the way? Would he drag her through the courts just to avoid acknowledging their daughter? Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Fine," he said, his eyes never leaving Nina. "I'll agree to the paternity test, but this doesn't mean I'm going to be part of her life." Nina's heart twisted at his words, but she forced herself to remain calm. This wasn't about Thomas wanting to be involved. It was about making sure Jade had what she deserved. If Thomas wanted to keep his distance, that was his choice, but he wouldn't be allowed to simply walk away without taking responsibility. "That's your decision," Nina replied quietly, meeting his gaze with strength. "But she's still your daughter, and you owe it to her to at least acknowledge that." Thomas didn't respond. His lawyer quickly moved on, outlining the terms of the paternity test and the next steps in the process. The formalities washed over Nina as she nodded along, her mind already processing what was happening. The fight wasn't over yet, but they had taken a crucial step forward. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and preparations for the paternity test. Sarah handled most of the details, but Nina was always kept in the loop, her anxiety growing as the date of the test approached. Every day that passed brought her closer to finally proving, legally, what she had known all along. Thomas was Jade's father, and he couldn't escape that truth any longer. The day of the paternity test came quickly. It was a simple process, just a cheek swab for both Thomas and baby Jade, but the significance of it weighed heavily on Nina. She brought Jade with her to the clinic, her little girl bundled up in her arms as they waited for Thomas to arrive. When he finally walked into the clinic, Nina's breath caught in her throat. It was strange seeing him here, in this sterile, impersonal space. For a moment, she was reminded of the time they had spent together, of the nights when things between them had felt real, as if there was a future for them. But those memories quickly faded, replaced by the cold reality of who Thomas really was. A man who had tried to erase her and their daughter from his life. Thomas barely acknowledged Nina as he signed the necessary forms. His expression was stiff, businesslike, as if this was just another meeting in his schedule. Nina couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for Jade. This was her father, a man who didn't even look at her as she sat cradled in Nina's arms. The swab was taken quickly, and Thomas left without a word, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived. Nina sat in the clinic for a few moments afterward, holding Jade close as the emotions of the day washed over her. It wasn't easy seeing Thomas like that, so detached, so cold. But she had done it. She had taken the first step towards securing Jade's future. The waiting period for the test results was agonizing. Nina tried to stay busy, filling her days with caring for Jade and attending the programs at the Women's Resource Center. But no matter what she did, the thought of the upcoming results was always there, lingering in the back of her mind. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Nina received a call from Sarah. The paternity test results were in, and as expected, Thomas was confirmed as Jade's father. It was a victory, but it felt bittersweet. This wasn't the fairy tale ending Nina had once dreamed of. There was no reunion, no moment of realization from Thomas that he wanted to be part of their lives. Instead, it was simply a legal acknowledgement of what Nina had known all along. Still, it was a crucial step. With the paternity test confirmed, Sarah began the process of filing for child support. Thomas's legal team was quick to respond, and the negotiations began. Nina knew that this would be another battle, but at least now she had the law on her side. As the legal process moved forward, Nina found herself reflecting more and more on the choices she had made. There had been moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if it had been worth it to fight this hard. But every time she looked at Jade, her heart filled with love and pride. This little girl deserved everything the world had to offer, and Nina was determined to give it to her. One evening, as Nina rocked Jade to sleep, she thought about the future. Thomas might never be part of Jade's life, but Nina knew that didn't define who her daughter would become. Jade was already surrounded by love, from Nina, from the friends she had made at the resource center, from Sarah, and from the small community that had supported them through this journey. Jade would grow up knowing that she was loved, cherished, and valued, and Nina would make sure that no matter what challenges they faced, they would face them together. The next phase of the legal battle was the hardest yet. With the paternity test results officially on record, Thomas was now legally bound to support Jade, whether he liked it or not. But Nina knew that financial support was just the beginning. What mattered most to her wasn't the money. It was ensuring that Jade would grow up knowing her worth, despite the circumstances of her father's absence. Thomas's legal team, as expected, fought back hard. They were willing to settle financially, but they pushed for strict conditions that would keep Thomas from having to be involved in Jade's life beyond sending checks. No visitation, no parental rights, just money. It was clear that Thomas wanted to keep as much distance as possible between himself and his daughter. As Sarah outlined the settlement offer during one of their meetings, Nina felt a surge of frustration. "They're trying to wash their hands of this," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "They want to treat Jade like some problem they can just pay off and forget about." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "That's exactly what they're trying to do. But the good news is, we have leverage. With the paternity established, the law is on our side. We can push back on these terms if you want." Nina leaned back in her chair, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She didn't want Thomas in Jade's life, not if he was going to be emotionally absent, but at the same time, she didn't want Jade to grow up feeling like she wasn't worthy of her father's love. It was a complicated mix of emotions, and Nina didn't know what the right answer was. "I just want what's best for Jade," she said quietly, her gaze falling to the floor. "I don't want her to feel like she's missing something because he's not around." Sarah placed a reassuring hand on Nina's arm. You're a great mother, Nina, and Jade is going to grow up with so much love. Whether Thomas chooses to be part of her life or not, you're giving her everything she needs." Nina smiled faintly, but the uncertainty still lingered. "So what do we do next?" "We counter their offer," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We'll push for more favorable terms. If they want to keep Thomas out of Jade's life, fine. But we're not going to let them dictate all the terms. You deserve more than that." The negotiations dragged on for weeks. Each side exchanged offers and counteroffers, with neither willing to fully back down. Nina found herself growing weary of the constant back and forth, but Sarah remained steady, guiding her through each step of the process. Nina knew she was lucky to have someone like Sarah in her corner, someone who genuinely cared about her and Jade's future. One evening, as Nina was sitting in her living room after putting Jade to bed, her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. It was an update on the latest round of negotiations. Thomas's team had finally agreed to a more balanced settlement, a generous financial arrangement, with no visitation or parental involvement on Thomas's part unless Nina specifically requested it in the future. Nina stared at the message, her heart pounding. This was it, the offer that would settle everything. The legal fight could finally be over. But as she read through the details, a sense of unease settled over her. This arrangement would give her the financial support she needed to raise Jade, but it came with a heavy emotional cost. Thomas would be legally absolved from any responsibility beyond writing checks. He could go on living his life, free from the consequences of his actions. Nina wasn't sure how to feel. On one hand, she had won. She had secured her daughter's future, and they would be taken care of financially. But on the other hand, it felt like Thomas had gotten exactly what he wanted, to wash his hands of the situation and move on without ever having to truly acknowledge Jade's existence. She picked up the phone and called Sarah, needing to talk through her thoughts. "Do you think this is the best option?" Nina asked, her voice hesitant. "I don't want to force him to be part of Jade's life if he doesn't want to, but at the same time, it feels like he's getting away with it." Sarah sighed, understanding the weight of Nina's dilemma. "I know it feels that way, Nina. And you're right, this settlement does let him off the hook in a lot of ways, but it also gives you the power to decide what's best for Jade moving forward. You have the option to keep him out of her life, but if she ever wants to reach out to him, you can reopen that door. This isn't the end of the story, it's just a chapter." Nina took a deep breath, letting Sarah's words sink in. She hadn't thought about it that way before. This settlement didn't have to be the final word. If Jade grew up and wanted to know more about her father, Nina could support her in that decision. But for now, she had what she needed to build a life for her daughter. "Okay," Nina said finally, "let's move forward with it." The settlement was finalized a few weeks later. It felt surreal, sitting in the courtroom as the final documents were signed and everything became official. Thomas wasn't present. His lawyer handled everything on his behalf. But that didn't surprise Nina. He had been distant from the start, and she hadn't expected him to suddenly show up now. As the judge reviewed the documents, Nina glanced over at Sarah, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. This was the right choice. She had fought hard for Jade, and now they could finally move forward without the looming threat of Thomas's influence hanging over them. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp bang, and just like that, it was over. The legal battle that had consumed Nina's life for months had come to an end. She felt a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over her as she left the courthouse, her mind already turning to the future. With the settlement behind her, Nina focused on building a life for herself and Jade. The financial support from Thomas allowed her to finally move out of the cramped apartment she had been living in and into a better neighborhood, where Jade could grow up in a safer environment. It wasn't a mansion, but it was home. And for Nina, that was enough. Nina returned to school, determined to finish her degree and build a career that would allow her to provide for Jade without relying on anyone else. She enrolled in online classes, balancing her studies with the demands of motherhood. It wasn't easy, but Nina had never been one to back down from a challenge. Every late-night study session, every early morning class was for Jade, for the future she was determined to give her daughter. As the months passed, Nina's life began to settle into a new rhythm. She found joy in the little moments, Jade's first smile, her first laugh, the way her tiny fingers wrapped around Nina's hand. These were the moments that mattered, the moments that reminded Nina why she had fought so hard. Jade was thriving, and that was all Nina needed to feel fulfilled. Life began to take on a new normal for Nina and Jade. The long, sleepless nights were still challenging, but they were filled with moments of happiness that made everything worth it. Jade grew quickly, her eyes bright with curiosity as she discovered the world around her. Nina reveled in the small milestones, the first time Jade reached for a toy, the first time she rolled over, and the first time she babbled, "Mama," which filled Nina's heart with pure joy. Despite the heavy burden of raising her daughter alone, Nina found herself growing stronger with each passing day. Her routine was busy, balancing motherhood with her coursework, but she had a purpose now. Her dreams of finishing her degree, finding a good job, and giving Jade the life she deserved pushed her forward even when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. Sarah remained a constant support. They kept in touch, not just as lawyer and client, but as friends. Sarah would check in often, making sure Nina was doing okay and offering any help she could provide. And though the legal battle with Thomas was over, Sarah knew the emotional toll it had taken on Nina still lingered. One afternoon, as they sat in a local cafe, Sarah brought up a topic that Nina had been avoiding for months. "Have you thought about what you'll tell Jade when she gets older?" Sarah asked, her tone gentle. "About Thomas, I mean." Nina sighed, stirring her coffee as she thought about the question. It had been on her mind a lot lately, especially as Jade grew older and more aware of the world around her. One day, Jade would ask questions about her father, and Nina wasn't sure how to answer them. "I don't know," Nina admitted. "I don't want to lie to her, but I also don't want her to feel like she's missing something because he didn't want to be part of her life." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable. But you'll find the right way to tell her when the time comes. And remember, you don't have to have all the answers right now." Nina smiled, grateful for Sarah's reassurance. "I just want her to know that she's loved. I don't want her to feel like she wasn't enough because of him." "She'll know that, Nina," Sarah said firmly. "She has you, and that's more than enough. You've given her everything she needs." As they continued their conversation, Nina realized that no matter what happened, she had the strength to navigate whatever challenges came her way. Jade would grow up knowing love, support, and the truth when the time was right. Nina was determined to create a life where Jade never questioned her worth, despite Thomas's absence. Months passed, and Nina's life continued to evolve. Her classes were going well, and she was excelling in her studies, though the workload sometimes felt overwhelming. But every time she felt like giving up, she would think about Jade's future, and that gave her the push she needed to keep going. One evening, after a particularly long day of studying and taking care of Jade, Nina received an unexpected phone call. It was Sarah, but this time her voice held an unusual tone of concern. "Nina, I just got word from one of my colleagues," Sarah said slowly. "Thomas has been dealing with some legal trouble of his own." Nina's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated before continuing. "It seems like there's been an investigation into some of his business practices. He's facing potential charges for fraud and financial misconduct." Nina was stunned. Thomas had always seemed untouchable, with his wealth and power shielding him from any real consequences. But now it seemed like everything was catching up to him. "I thought you should know," Sarah added gently. "It could affect things moving forward, especially if it impacts his financial situation." Nina took a deep breath, trying to process the information. The news was shocking, but at the same time it felt like a strange form of justice. Thomas had tried to use his wealth to avoid responsibility for Jade, and now that very wealth was being called into question. "Does this mean I should expect any changes with the settlement?" Nina asked, her voice steady, despite the shock she was feeling. "It's too early to say for sure," Sarah replied. "But if his financial situation takes a serious hit, there could be implications for the child support. We'll keep an eye on it." Nina nodded, though her mind was already racing with thoughts of what this could mean for her and Jade. Despite everything, she had never wished harm on Thomas, but the idea that he might finally face consequences for his actions, both personal and professional, brought a sense of closure she hadn't expected. As the days passed, news of Thomas's legal troubles spread. The media picked up on the story, and it seemed like every news outlet was reporting on his potential downfall. The once powerful CEO, who had built an empire on the backs of others, was now at risk of losing everything. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change, and how no amount of money or influence could shield someone from the consequences of their actions forever. Nina followed the news cautiously, not wanting to get too caught up in the drama. She had her own life to focus on, her own dreams to pursue, but there was something undeniably satisfying about watching the man who had dismissed her and Jade so easily now being held accountable in ways he never imagined. One morning, as Nina was feeding Jade breakfast, she received a message from Sarah that made her pause. "Thomas has been arrested. It's all over the news. I'll fill you in on the details when I can, but it looks like his legal situation just got a lot worse." Nina's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly. She turned on the TV, and sure enough, the headline was splashed across the screen. "Wealthy CEO Thomas Whitman arrested amid fraud allegations." The news anchor explained that Thomas had been taken into custody after new evidence surfaced, implicating him in a wide range of financial crimes. His once untouchable reputation had been shattered, and now he was facing serious jail time if convicted. Nina sat down, her mind swirling with emotions. She had never imagined this would be the outcome of their story. For years, Thomas had lived in a world where consequences didn't seem to apply to him, but now it seemed that the tables had turned. As the news continued to play in the background, Nina looked down at Jade, who was happily playing with her food, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. Nina smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. No matter what happened with Thomas, she knew one thing for certain. Jade would grow up in a world where she was loved and valued. Thomas's downfall might have brought a sense of closure, but it was Jade's future that truly mattered. Nina had fought for her daughter. And now, she could focus on giving her the life she deserved, free from the shadows of the past. The fallout from Thomas's arrest was swift and intense. His once flawless reputation as a powerful CEO crumbled in the face of mounting evidence of financial misconduct and fraud. As the days passed, news outlets covered every detail of the scandal. His company's stock plummeted, his name was dragged through the mud, and public opinion turned sharply against him. For Nina, watching it all unfold felt surreal. Thomas had once been untouchable, a man whose power and wealth seemed to shield him from any accountability. But now he was facing the consequences of years of deceit and manipulation. It was strange to see him, once so confident and untouchable, brought down in such a public and humiliating way. Nina received regular updates from Sarah, who monitored the situation closely. The child support arrangement had not been effected yet, but with Thomas's financial future uncertain, Nina knew things could change. Still, she didn't worry too much about the money. She had made it through without him before, and she knew she could do it again. More importantly, she was focused on Jade and the life they were building together. As the weeks turned into months, Nina found herself reflecting on the journey she had been through. From the moment she found out she was pregnant, to the legal battle with Thomas, to watching him face his downfall, it had been a whirlwind of emotions. But through it all, she had grown stronger. Stronger as a woman, as a mother, and as a person. One day, as Nina was studying for an upcoming exam, Sarah called with an important update. "Nina, I've been speaking with Thomas's legal team," Sarah began, her voice steady, but with a hint of something Nina couldn't quite place. Given the severity of his legal issues, they're looking to settle the child support arrangement differently. They're offering a lump sum payment, a significant one, that would cover all future support for Jade. Nina paused, letting the information sink in. A lump sum would provide financial security for years to come, but it also meant that Thomas would be entirely removed from Jade's life, financially and otherwise. It was a tempting offer, but Nina couldn't help but feel conflicted. "What do you think?" Nina asked, her voice unsure. Sarah was quiet for a moment before responding. "It's a substantial amount, and it would give you the freedom to move forward without having to worry about future court battles or changes in his financial situation. But it also means there would be no ongoing responsibility from Thomas. Once the payment is made, that's it." Nina nodded, thinking through the implications. She had fought hard for Thomas to acknowledge Jade as his daughter, even if only legally. But she also knew that Jade's well-being was her top priority, and securing their financial future without having to constantly battle Thomas's legal team sounded like a relief. "Is there a catch?" Nina asked, her tone cautious. Sarah sighed. "Not really a catch, but the terms are clear. Once the payment is made, there's no going back. You can't ask for more support down the road, and Thomas will have no further obligations. It's a clean break. A clean break." Nina mulled over the words. A part of her felt like accepting the offer would be letting Thomas off the hook once again. But another part of her wanted to put all of this behind her, to focus on her life with Jade, free from the constant shadow of Thomas's influence. "I'll need some time to think about it," Nina said finally. "Take as much time as you need," Sarah replied. "There's no rush, and I'll support you no matter what decision you make." For the next few days, Nina couldn't stop thinking about the offer. She knew the money would provide a sense of security that would allow her to focus on raising Jade without constantly worrying about the financial future. But she also knew that taking the lump sum meant accepting that Thomas would be completely out of their lives, and Jade would grow up without even the possibility of knowing her father. Late one night after Jade had fallen asleep, Nina sat by the window, staring out at the quiet city streets below. Her thoughts drifted back to everything she had been through. She had fought so hard to ensure that Thomas took responsibility for his daughter. And now, With his life unraveling, it seemed like that fight was coming to an unexpected end. But as she looked down at her sleeping daughter, she realized that the battle had never really been about Thomas. It had always been about Jade, about giving her the best possible future. And maybe, just maybe, accepting the lump sum would allow them to finally move forward without the weight of Thomas's presence looming over them. The next morning, Nina called Sarah and gave her answer. "I'll take the lump sum," she said, her voice steady. "It's time for us to move on." The settlement was finalized within weeks, and Nina felt an overwhelming sense of relief once it was all over. The money was deposited into a trust for Jade, securing her future, and Nina finally felt like she could breathe again. No more legal battles, no more courtrooms, no more worrying about what Thomas might do next. For the first time in a long time, Nina felt free. Months passed and Nina's life continued to flourish. She graduated with honors from her program, securing a job that she loved and that allowed her to provide for Jade without relying on anyone else. Jade was growing quickly, her bright personality shining through more and more each day. Nina often found herself marveling at how far they had come. From the uncertainty of her pregnancy, to the battles with Thomas, to where they were now, it had been a long and difficult journey, but Nina had come out the other side stronger than she ever imagined. One afternoon, as Nina and Jade played in the park, Nina reflected on how much her life had changed. She watched Jade run around, her laughter filling the air, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was the life she had fought for, one filled with love, joy, and freedom. Sarah joined them at the park, bringing coffee and sitting down next to Nina on the bench. "You seem more at peace these days," Sarah observed with a smile. Nina nodded, her eyes following Jade as she played on the swings. "I am. It feels like we've finally moved on from all of that. And Jade, she's growing up so fast. Every day she reminds me why I fought so hard." Sarah smiled, glancing at Jade. "She's lucky to have you." Nina returned the smile. "I'm the lucky one. She gave me the strength to keep going." As they sat in the warmth of the afternoon sun, Nina realized that this was what she had been fighting for all along. Not for Thomas, not for financial support, but for moments like this. For a future where she and Jade could live freely, without the shadows of the past holding them back. As Nina and Jade's life continued to blossom, the shadow of Thomas's absence slowly faded into the background. The legal battle, the negotiations, and all the hardships of the past were now distant memories. What mattered was the present, this life that Nina had worked so hard to build for herself and her daughter. Nina was thriving in her new job. She had secured a position at a nonprofit organization that focused on supporting single mothers and their children. It was a cause close to her heart, and the work was fulfilling in ways she hadn't expected. Every day she interacted with women who had faced challenges similar to her own, and she found strength in being able to give back to others who were still navigating their own journeys. Her success at work also brought stability to their home life. The new apartment they had moved into was a world away from the cramped, stressful space Nina had lived in before. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm, filled with laughter, and, most importantly, it was safe. Jade had her own room, decorated with bright colors and stuffed animals, and she was thriving in her new environment. One evening, as Nina prepared dinner, Jade ran into the kitchen holding one of her picture books. "Mommy, can you read to me?" Jade asked, her big eyes shining with excitement. Nina smiled, setting down the spoon she was using to stir the pot. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's take a quick break." They sat together on the living room couch. Jade cuddled up next to Nina as she began to read the book aloud. It was a simple story, but as Nina read, she couldn't help but feel a sense of deep contentment. These were the moments that mattered, the quiet, ordinary moments filled with love and connection. Jade pointed to a picture in the book. "What's the daddy doing?" Nina's heart skipped a beat. She had known this day would come, but it still caught her off guard. She set the book down for a moment and looked at her daughter, who was now staring at her with innocent curiosity. Nina took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had always planned to tell Jade the truth, but now that the moment was here, she wasn't sure how to begin. Jade was still so young. How could she explain everything in a way that her daughter would understand? "Well," Nina began slowly, "some families have daddies and some don't. It doesn't mean they aren't special. You have so many people who love you, Jade. That's what's most important." Jade seemed to think about this for a moment, her little brow furrowing as she considered her mother's words. "Do I have a daddy?" Nina smiled softly, pulling Jade closer. "You do, sweetheart. But sometimes people can't be part of our lives the way we expect. Your daddy isn't with us, but you have me, and I love you more than anything in the world." Jade's face brightened at that, her worries forgotten as she wrapped her arms around Nina's neck. "I love you, Mommy." Nina held her daughter close, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. She knew that there would be more questions as Jade got older. But for now, this was enough. Jade knew she was loved, and that was all Nina wanted her to feel. As time passed, Nina continued to focus on her career, her studies, and, most importantly, raising Jade. But no matter how busy her life became, the thought of Thomas's absence and how it would affect Jade always lingered in the back of her mind. She wondered if one day Jade would want to know more about her father, and if so, how she would handle that conversation. One afternoon, while at work, Nina received a call from Sarah. It had been months since they last spoke, and Nina had assumed everything related to Thomas's situation was long behind them. But Sarah's tone suggested otherwise. "Nina, I just wanted to give you a heads up," Sarah began, her voice cautious. "There's been some new developments with Thomas's case. It looks like he's accepted a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial, but part of the terms is that he'll likely serve some prison time." Nina was quiet for a moment, processing the news. She had known Thomas's legal troubles were serious, but she hadn't expected things to escalate to the point of him potentially going to prison. It felt strange, like a door was finally closing on that chapter of her life. "How long do you think he'll serve?" Nina asked. "It's hard to say for sure," Sarah replied. "It could be a few years, maybe more depending on the final sentencing. I thought you should know, just in case it comes up or if you have any concerns about how this might affect Jade." Nina thanked Sarah for the update and hung up the phone, her mind spinning. She hadn't thought much about Thomas in recent months, especially now that their lives were settled and moving forward. But hearing this news brought back a flood of emotions: resentment, relief, and oddly, a sense of closure. Later that night, as Nina sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, she reflected on the news. Thomas's downfall had been slow and painful to watch, but she had never wished him harm. All she had ever wanted was for him to take responsibility for Jade. But now it seemed like his life had spiraled so far out of control that even that was no longer possible. As she gazed out at the city lights, Nina realized something important. Thomas had been a part of her past, but he no longer defined her future. She and Jade had built something strong, something beautiful, without him. And while Thomas's story was ending in a way no one could have predicted, Nina knew that her and Jade's story was just beginning. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Nina continued to excel at her job, earning the respect of her colleagues and even being promoted to a leadership position within the organization. She was proud of the work she was doing, helping other single mothers navigate the challenges she had faced herself. It was fulfilling in a way that gave her purpose beyond her personal life, and it was something she was truly passionate about. Jade was thriving too. She was enrolled in preschool now, and every day Nina watched as her daughter learned new things and made new friends. Jade's laughter filled their home, and Nina couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for how far they had come. One evening, after a long day at work, Nina sat down with a glass of wine and reflected on the journey she had been on. From the moment she had discovered she was pregnant, to the legal battles with Thomas, to where they were now, it had been a long, hard road. But every step of the way, Nina had fought for her daughter, and now they were finally in a place of peace. She thought back to the day Jade had asked about her father. That innocent question had opened the door to conversations that would surely come as Jade grew older. But Nina wasn't afraid of those conversations anymore. She knew she would always tell Jade the truth, but she also knew that Jade's life would be filled with love, no matter what. As the evening wore on, Nina felt a sense of calm settle over her. For so long, she had been defined by the fight, by her battle to ensure Jade had the future she deserved. But now, the fight was over, and they had won. It was time to let go of the past and fully embrace the future. As the years passed, Nina's life settled into a steady, fulfilling rhythm. She had carved out a future for herself and Jade that was full of love, laughter, and stability. The chaos of her past with Thomas seemed like a distant memory, especially as she poured her energy into her career and raising her daughter. Yet, despite how content her life had become, there was always a lingering thought in the back of her mind. When would Jade ask about her father again? And how would she handle it? Jade, now approaching her 8th birthday, was a vibrant and curious child. She excelled in school, made friends easily, and had a heart full of compassion. Nina couldn't have been prouder of the young girl she was becoming. But as Jade grew, Nina knew that the questions about her father would eventually resurface. She had only ever given her daughter simple answers, but as Jade got older, she would want more details. And Nina had promised herself she would be truthful when that time came. It wasn't long before that moment arrived. One afternoon after school, Jade approached Nina with a thoughtful expression on her face. They were sitting in the living room, the sunlight streaming through the windows, filling the room with warmth. "Mommy, can I ask you something?" Jade said, her voice tentative but curious. Nina smiled and put down the book she was reading. "Of course, sweetheart. You can ask me anything." Jade shifted in her seat, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. "I've been thinking about my daddy. You don't talk about him much. I was just wondering, who is he?" Nina took a deep breath, her heart pounding a little faster. She had known this day would come, but it didn't make the moment any easier. Still, she was ready. She had spent years preparing herself for this conversation, and now it was time to give Jade the answers she deserved. Nina patted the seat next to her, and Jade moved closer, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "Well," Nina began softly, "your daddy's name is Thomas. He's someone I knew a long time ago. We had a relationship before you were born, but things didn't work out between us." Jade looked up at her mother, her eyes wide with interest. "Did he love you?" Nina hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I think at the time, we cared about each other. But sometimes, people aren't ready for the responsibilities that come with love. And that's what happened with your daddy. He wasn't ready to be part of our lives." Jade frowned, her young mind processing this information. "Does he know about me?" Nina nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, he knows about you. But he made the decision not to be involved in our lives." Jade was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. Why didn't he want to be part of my life? The question, though expected, still stung. Nina knew she couldn't shield Jade from the truth forever, but she wanted to present it in a way that wouldn't hurt her daughter's self-esteem. "It wasn't about you, Jade," Nina said gently. "Your daddy wasn't ready to be a father. It's not because of anything you did or didn't do. Sometimes people make choices that have nothing to do with us, and that's what happened here. But you are loved, so loved. By me, by your grandparents, by our friends. Everyone who knows you loves you." Jade snuggled closer to her mother, taking in her words. "Do you think he ever thinks about me?" Nina's heart ached at the question, but she smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Jade's face. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I think that if he could see the amazing girl you've become, he would be very proud of you." Jade smiled at that, her face brightening. "Thanks, Mommy." They sat together in comfortable silence for a few moments before Jade spoke again. "Do you think I'll ever meet him?" Nina had thought about this question for years, wondering what she would say if Jade ever expressed a desire to meet Thomas. It was a complicated situation. Thomas's legal troubles and his complete absence from their lives made the prospect of a reunion difficult. But Nina also knew that she couldn't close the door on that possibility if Jade truly wanted it one day. "If that's something you want when you're older, we can talk about it," Nina said carefully. "I'll always support you in whatever decision you make. But for now, let's focus on all the wonderful people who are in your life." Jade seemed satisfied with that answer and nodded. "Okay, Mommy." After their conversation, Nina felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had always worried about how to handle the topic of Thomas with Jade, but now that the first real discussion had happened, she realized it wasn't as frightening as she had imagined. Jade had taken the information in stride, and though there were likely to be more questions in the future, Nina felt confident in her ability to handle them with honesty and love. A few days later, Nina received a surprising email from Sarah. "Hey Nina, I just wanted to let you know that I've heard through some contacts that Thomas is getting out of prison earlier than expected. His case has been in the news again lately because of a recent appeal. I thought you should be aware, just in case this changes anything on your end." Nina's stomach dropped as she read the email. Thomas? Out of prison? After all this time, she had assumed that chapter of her life was closed for good, but now it seemed like there was a possibility he could re-enter the picture. If not directly, then at least in the background. For a moment, Nina felt a surge of anxiety. What would this mean for her and Jade? Would Thomas try to contact them? Would Jade hear about his release and start asking more questions? It was a lot to process, and Nina wasn't sure how to feel. She decided to meet with Sarah to discuss the implications of Thomas's early release. They sat together in Sarah's office, the sun streaming in through the large windows. "I know this is a lot to take in," Sarah began, her tone calm but sympathetic. "Thomas's release doesn't necessarily mean he's going to reach out or try to re-enter your lives, but I wanted to give you a heads up so you can be prepared if anything changes." Nina nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "Do you think he'll try to contact us?" "It's hard to say," Sarah replied. "Given his history of staying out of your life, I don't think he'll make an effort. But people can change, and sometimes they want to make amends. If he does reach out, you're under no obligation to respond." Nina appreciated Sarah's candor. She had come to trust Sarah deeply over the years, and she knew that whatever happened, Sarah would have her back. "I don't think I'm ready for him to be part of our lives," Nina admitted. "Jade's still so young, and she's just now starting to ask about him. I don't want to complicate things." Sarah nodded understandingly. "That's completely valid. You're the one who knows what's best for Jade. If Thomas does contact you, you can decide how to handle it on your terms." Nina left the meeting feeling more grounded but still unsure about what the future would hold. For years, she had been focused on creating a life for Jade that was free from Thomas's influence, and now it seemed like there was a chance that he could come back into the picture, whether she wanted him to or not. That night, as Nina sat by Jade's bed, reading her a bedtime story, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. No matter what happened with Thomas, she knew one thing for certain. She and Jade were stronger than ever. Their bond was unbreakable, and Nina had created a life for her daughter that was full of love, stability, and hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next few weeks passed uneventfully, but Nina couldn't shake the lingering feeling of uncertainty. The knowledge that Thomas was out of prison weighed on her mind, even though she tried to focus on her work, her home, and Jade's happiness. Life had been so calm, so predictable, but the news of his release brought back memories and emotions she had worked so hard to move past. One day, as she was preparing for her shift at work, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Nina hesitated before answering, a feeling of unease creeping in. "Hello?" she said, her voice cautious. There was a pause on the other end before a familiar voice replied, one she hadn't heard in years. "Nina, it's Thomas." Nina's heart dropped. She hadn't expected him to call, especially not so soon after his release. Her grip on the phone tightened as a rush of emotions flooded her. Anger, resentment, confusion. "What do you want, Thomas?" she asked him, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," Thomas began, his tone softer than she remembered. "But I just wanted to, I don't know, I wanted to talk, to apologize. I know it's late, way too late, but I've had a lot of time to think about things and I realize now how much I messed up." Nina remained silent, letting him speak. She wasn't sure what to say or if she even wanted to hear his apologies after all this time. "I'm not asking for anything," Thomas continued. "I just wanted you to know that I regret everything. The way I treated you, the way I abandoned my responsibilities. I know I can't change the past, but I wanted to at least try to make amends, even if that just means apologizing." Nina took a deep breath, her emotions swirling. She had imagined this conversation many times over the years, but now that it was happening, it felt surreal. "You walked away from me and your daughter without a second thought," Nina said, her voice firm but calm. "You didn't just make a mistake, Thomas. You left us to fend for ourselves, and I had to rebuild everything from scratch. Jade grew up without you, though, and I had to fight for every ounce of stability we have now." "I know," Thomas said quietly. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm not asking for your forgiveness because I don't deserve it. But I just wanted to tell you that I'm trying to be better, trying to figure out what to do with my life now that everything's fallen apart." Nina wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her wanted to hang up, to tell him that his apologies were too little, too late. But another part of her, the part that had grown and evolved through the years, knew that holding on to anger wouldn't help her or Jade. It wouldn't change what had happened, and it wouldn't make their future any easier. After a long pause, Nina finally spoke. "I appreciate the apology, Thomas, but Jade and I have moved on. We've built a life without you, and I'm not sure where you fit into that, if you even fit at all." "I understand," Thomas said, his voice filled with a kind of resigned sadness. "I don't expect anything from you, Nina. I just wanted to say my piece." There was a moment of silence before Nina responded. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Jade. If you ever want to be a part of her life, it'll be on my terms, and only if it's what she wants. But she's still young, and I'm not going to let you waltz in and disrupt everything we've worked for." Thomas seemed to take in her words carefully. "I wouldn't dream of doing that. I'll respect whatever boundaries you set, and if Jade never wants to know me, I'll accept that too." The conversation ended shortly after, and as Nina hung up the phone, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't closure, not exactly, but it was something. Thomas's apology didn't erase the past or undo the damage he had caused, but it gave Nina a sense of control over the situation. She had the power to decide what role, if any, he would play in their lives. That evening, as Nina sat on the couch with Jade, she couldn't help but think about the future. She had never wanted to deprive Jade of the chance to know her father, but she had also never wanted to expose her daughter to the pain and confusion that Thomas had brought into her own life. Now, with Thomas back in the picture, even in this small way, Nina knew she had to tread carefully. For the next few days, Nina kept the conversation with Thomas to herself. She wasn't sure if or when she would tell Jade about it, but she wanted to make sure she was fully prepared for any questions her daughter might have. In the meantime, she focused on the things that mattered most: her job, her friends, and of course, Jade. A week later, while sitting at the kitchen table one evening, Jade asked a question that caught Nina off guard. "Mommy, do you think my daddy will ever come to visit me?" Nina froze for a moment, the weight of the question hanging in the air. She hadn't expected Jade to ask about Thomas again so soon, especially after their conversation a few months ago. But now that the question had been asked, Nina knew she had to handle it with care. "I don't know, sweetheart," Nina said honestly. "Your daddy lives far away and we haven't been in touch for a long time. But if that's something you want, we can talk about it." Jade thought for a moment, her little face scrunched up in concentration. "I think I'd like to meet him one day, just to see what he's like." Nina's heart clenched. She had always known that Jade would want to know more about Thomas eventually, but now that the moment was here, she wasn't sure how to feel. Still, she had always promised herself that she would honor Jade's wishes when the time came. "We can think about that," Nina said softly, brushing a strand of hair behind Jade's ear. "When you're older, if you still want to meet him, we can see what we can do. But for now, you have so many people who love you. Me, your grandparents, and all our friends. You're not missing anything, okay?" Jade smiled, nodding. "Okay, Mommy." As Nina tucked Jade into bed that night, she couldn't help but think about how much her daughter had grown. Jade was no longer the little baby she had once held in her arms, completely dependent on her. She was growing into a thoughtful, curious child, one who would eventually have her own questions, her own thoughts, and her own decisions to make. Nina kissed Jade on the forehead and whispered, "Good night, my love," before turning out the light. Later that night, Nina sat on the couch, her mind racing with thoughts about what lay ahead. She knew that Thomas's release from prison could bring new complications into their lives, but she also knew that she had the power to control what happened next. Whatever role Thomas might play in Jade's future, Nina was determined to protect her daughter's happiness and well-being above all else. As she sipped her tea and stared out at the quiet city streets, Nina felt a renewed sense of strength. No matter what happened, she and Jade would face it together, just as they always had. And as long as they had each other, Nina knew that they would be okay. Days passed after Nina's conversation with Jade, and though life continued its regular rhythm, Nina couldn't shake the thoughts of what might come next. Thomas's unexpected call had stirred up old feelings, and while she had accepted his apology on the surface, she was cautious about what his presence might mean for Jade. Should she even consider allowing Thomas to meet his daughter after all these years? Would it be for Jade's benefit, or would it open wounds best left closed? One afternoon, as Nina was leaving work, she received another call from Thomas. The sight of his name flashing on her phone made her stomach churn, but after a moment of hesitation, she answered. "Hi, Nina." Thomas's voice was steady, but there was a nervousness she hadn't noticed before. "What is it, Thomas?" Nina asked, not in the mood for small talk. I know I said I wouldn't interfere or push my way back into your lives, but I've been thinking, I'd really like to meet Jade. If you'd allow it." Nina felt her breath catch in her throat. She had known this request might come, but hearing the words aloud made the reality of the situation hit harder. Jade had asked about her father not long ago, and now here he was, asking for a chance to meet the daughter he had abandoned. Could she truly allow this? Did he deserve to meet the child he had walked away from? "I don't know, Thomas," Nina said slowly, carefully choosing her words. "Jade's still young, and she's just now starting to ask about you. I need to be sure this is what's best for her. I'm not going to let you come into her life just to leave again." "I understand," Thomas said quickly, his voice more urgent. "I don't want to hurt her. I want to try and be a part of her life, if that's even possible." There was a long pause, and Nina could hear the sincerity in Thomas's voice. But sincerity didn't erase the years of absence, the pain he had caused by leaving her to raise Jade alone. She had done everything to protect her daughter, to give her a life full of love and stability. Letting Thomas back in felt like opening the door to uncertainty. "I need time to think about it," Nina finally said, her voice firm. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly. I'll talk to Jade, but you need to understand that whatever I decide, it'll be what's best for her, not for you." "I understand," Thomas replied, his tone resigned. "Take all the time you need." Nina hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, staring out at the busy street in front of her. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. She didn't want to keep Jade from her father if that was something her daughter truly wanted, but she also didn't want to risk Thomas hurting her again. That evening, after dinner, Nina sat down with Jade to talk. She wasn't sure how to approach the conversation, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. "Jade, can we talk for a minute?" Nina asked as Jade played with her toys in the living room. Jade looked up, curious. "Sure, Mommy. What's up?" Nina sat down on the couch, pulling Jade close to her. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. About your daddy." Jade's eyes widened with interest. "Did you find out something about him?" "I did," Nina said gently. "Your daddy called me recently. He wants to meet you." Jade's face lit up with surprise. "Really? He wants to meet me?" Nina nodded, though her heart was racing. "Yes, but I want to make sure this is what you want. Meeting your daddy could be a big change, and I want you to be ready for that. If you're not sure, that's okay. We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." Jade thought for a moment, her little brow furrowing in concentration. "I think I want to meet him," she said slowly, "just to see what he's like." Nina took a deep breath, nodding. "Okay, sweetheart, if that's what you want, then I'll talk to your daddy and we'll figure something out. But I need you to understand that meeting him might be different from what you expect. I don't want you to be disappointed if things don't go exactly as planned." Jade nodded earnestly. "I understand, Mommy. I just want to meet him." Nina hugged Jade tightly, her mind racing with the logistics of what this would mean. She had agreed to let Jade meet Thomas, but she wasn't sure how it would go or how it would affect their lives afterward. In the days that followed, Nina and Thomas worked out the details for the meeting. Nina was insistent that the first encounter be in a neutral setting, someplace where Jade could feel safe and where Nina could maintain control if things didn't go well. They decided on a small cafe near Nina's apartment, a place that Jade liked and where they could meet without too much pressure. The morning of the meeting, Nina could feel her nerves bubbling up, though she tried to remain calm for Jade's sake. Jade, on the other hand, was excited, asking endless questions about what her daddy might be like. "What do you think he'll say?" Jade asked as they got ready to leave. "I'm not sure," Nina admitted, "but I'm going to be with you the whole time, okay? If you ever feel uncomfortable or want to leave, just tell me." Jade smiled, her excitement palpable. "I can't wait to meet him." When they arrived at the cafe, Nina's heart pounded in her chest as she spotted Thomas sitting at a small table near the window. He looked different, older, worn, but there was something softer in his expression than she remembered. As they approached, Thomas stood up, his eyes locking onto Jade. Jade paused for a moment, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of her father for the first time. Nina could see the wonder and curiosity in her daughter's face, and for a brief moment, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. Thomas knelt down, meeting Jade's eyes at her level. "Hi, Jade," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm your dad." Jade stared at him for a moment before breaking into a shy smile. "Hi." The moment was simple but powerful. Nina watched as Thomas and Jade exchanged tentative words, their connection slowly building. Thomas seemed genuinely interested in getting to know his daughter, asking her questions about her favorite activities, her school, and her friends. Nina remained cautious, her eyes never leaving Thomas as he interacted with Jade. She could tell that he was nervous, but there was also a sincerity in his tone that she hadn't expected. For so long, she had been prepared to shield Jade from the pain of Thomas's absence, but now, watching them together, she wondered if maybe things could be different. After a while, Jade grew more comfortable, showing Thomas some of her drawings that she had brought with her. Thomas listened intently, smiling and nodding as Jade explained each picture with enthusiasm. Nina stayed quiet for most of the meeting, allowing Jade to take the lead. But as the time passed, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: hope, fear, and an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. When the meeting ended, Jade hugged Thomas goodbye, her eyes bright with excitement. "Will I see you again?" she asked innocently. Thomas glanced at Nina, his eyes filled with uncertainty. He didn't want to overstep, but Nina knew that this was a question only she could answer. "We'll see," Nina said gently, her voice steady. "We'll take things slow." Jade seemed satisfied with that answer and waved goodbye to Thomas as they left the cafe. Nina could feel Thomas's eyes on her as they walked away, and for the first time, she wondered if maybe he truly did want to change. That night, as Nina tucked Jade into bed, she felt a strange sense of relief. The meeting had gone better than she expected, and while she was still cautious about letting Thomas into their lives, she couldn't deny that Jade's happiness mattered most. "Did you have a good day?" Nina asked as she brushed a strand of hair from Jade's face. Jade nodded, her eyes sleepy but content. "Yeah, I'm glad I got to meet him." Nina smiled softly. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. Good night." As she turned off the light and closed the door, Nina stood in the hallway for a moment, her mind racing. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. And while she didn't know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. No matter what, she and Jade would face it together. The days following the meeting with Thomas were calm, almost surprisingly so. Nina had expected a whirlwind of emotions from Jade, more questions, more curiosity, but her daughter seemed at peace. It was as if meeting her father, even briefly, had answered some of the lingering questions Jade had carried in her young heart. For Nina, though, the quiet aftermath only brought more contemplation. She had been prepared for the worst, for a painful reunion or a rekindling of old wounds. But Thomas had been different. He wasn't the man she remembered, arrogant, self-centered, and focused solely on his own desires. The man she had seen at the cafe was older, humbled, and seemingly filled with remorse. Part of her wanted to believe that he had changed, that maybe, for Jade's sake, he could be a positive presence in their lives. But trust didn't come easily, especially not after so many years of silence and abandonment. One evening, after Jade had gone to bed, Nina found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. She had Thomas's number saved now, something she had been unsure about doing at first. But after the meeting, she felt a responsibility to at least keep the lines of communication open. For Jade's sake, she wasn't ready to give him full access to their lives, but she also couldn't deny that their daughter had been happy to meet her father. With a deep breath, Nina typed out a message. "Thank you for being respectful during the meeting. Jade seemed happy to meet you. We'll take things slow, but for now, I'm open to more visits if that's something you're serious about." She hesitated before pressing send, her finger hovering over the button. But after a moment, she hit send and leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. It felt strange, almost surreal to be texting Thomas after so many years. She had once imagined a future where they co-parented, where he was involved in Jade's life from the beginning, but that dream had shattered long ago. Now she was cautiously trying to rebuild something new, something healthier for their daughter. The reply came quicker than she expected. "I appreciate that, Nina. I'd love to see her again. I don't want to push, so please let me know when you think it's a good time. I'm serious about this, and I won't let her down again." Reading his response, Nina felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She appreciated his sincerity, but she wasn't ready to let her guard down completely. Thomas had to prove, over time, that he was willing to be the father Jade deserved. Words were easy. What she needed now were actions. Over the next few weeks, Nina allowed Thomas to meet with Jade again. The visits were brief, always supervised, and always in neutral locations. They went to the park together, where Jade would show her father how high she could swing, her laughter echoing through the air. They visited the zoo, where Thomas listened intently as Jade excitedly pointed out her favorite animals. The more Nina watched them together, the more she saw Jade's happiness. But with that happiness came her own internal struggle. Could she trust Thomas enough to let him be part of their lives? One afternoon, after one of their outings, Thomas pulled Nina aside as Jade played on the swings nearby him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know this can't be easy for you, but I'm grateful that you're giving me a chance." Nina looked at him, her expression guarded. "I'm doing this for Jade. She deserves to know her father, but I'm not going to let you hurt her. If you're in this, you have to be all in. There's no room for half measures." "I am all in," Thomas replied, his voice earnest. "I won't walk away again, I promise." Nina wanted to believe him, but promises had been broken before. "We'll see." As months passed, a new routine began to form. Thomas became a more consistent presence in Jade's life, though Nina kept her distance, observing cautiously. She allowed their relationship to grow, but always with a watchful eye, making sure that Thomas was living up to his word. So far, he had been reliable, showing up to every meeting, being attentive and kind to Jade. Nina still struggled with the idea of fully trusting him, but Jade's happiness remained her top priority. One evening, after a particularly fun day at the park, Jade sat with Nina on the couch, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. "Mommy," Jade said, her voice soft, "I like spending time with Daddy. He's nice." Nina smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I'm glad you're happy, sweetheart. That's what matters most." Jade was quiet for a moment, then looked up at Nina with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Daddy will stay in my life forever?" The question hit Nina hard, a lump forming in her throat. She didn't have an easy answer, and the last thing she wanted to do was make promises she couldn't keep. But she also didn't want to dampen Jade's hope. "I think your daddy is trying very hard to be a good part of your life now," Nina said carefully, "and as long as he keeps trying, we'll keep seeing him." Jade seemed satisfied with that answer, snuggling closer to her mother. "I'm happy, Mommy." Nina kissed the top of her head, feeling a mix of emotions, joy for her daughter's happiness, but also a deep sense of responsibility to protect her from any future disappointment. As more time passed, Thomas's involvement became a natural part of their routine. Nina was surprised at how well he integrated into Jade's life, and though their relationship was still far from perfect, it was clear that he was making an effort. Jade's laughter and smiles when she was with her father spoke volumes, and Nina couldn't ignore that. One day, Thomas asked if he could take Jade to meet his parents, Jade's grandparents, who had never known her. It was a huge step, one that Nina wasn't sure she was ready for. Thomas's parents had been distant during their relationship, and she hadn't kept in touch with them after things fell apart. Now the idea of Jade meeting them felt overwhelming. "I don't know if that's a good idea," Nina said, her hesitation clear. "They don't know anything about her. They want to meet her," Thomas insisted. "They regret not being involved from the start. I think it would mean a lot to Jade to know more about where she comes from." Nina mulled it over for a few days before agreeing, though with strict conditions. She would accompany Jade on the visit, and it would be short, just enough time for introductions. She wasn't ready to let these new people into Jade's life without fully understanding their intentions. The visit to Thomas's parents was tense at first, but as Nina watched Jade interact with her grandparents for the first time, she realized how much this connection meant. Jade asked endless questions about their family history, their traditions, and what her father was like when he was younger. For the first time, Jade was piecing together a part of her identity that had been missing for so long. Nina stood back, observing from a distance, as Jade laughed and smiled with her grandparents. She felt a strange sense of peace settle over her, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the disaster she had feared. Jade was learning about her roots, and in doing so was becoming more confident in who she was. After the visit, Jade ran to Nina, hugging her tightly. "Thank you, Mommy," she whispered. "I love knowing more about our family." Nina held her close, her heart full of love for her daughter. "I'm glad you're happy, Jade. That's what matters most." Over time, Nina and Thomas found a delicate balance. They weren't a family in the traditional sense, but they worked together for the sake of their daughter. Thomas continued to show up, proving that he was serious about being a part of Jade's life. Nina remained cautious, but she allowed herself to acknowledge that people could change, that redemption was possible, even for someone who had once caused so much pain. As the years passed, Nina watched Jade grow into a confident, loving young woman, someone who was deeply connected to both her mother and her father. It wasn't the life Nina had envisioned when she first learned she was pregnant, but it was a life filled with love, resilience, and second chances. And as she stood at Jade's high school graduation, watching her daughter smile brightly as she accepted her diploma, Nina knew that everything she had fought for, everything she had endured, had been worth it. She had given Jade the life she deserved, a life full of love, family, and hope. And in the end, that was all that mattered.